firstly, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here, and welcome to the first of our forums we've called it an expert for experts in Regulation 4. And I believe we have those people with us here today. It's a subject close to all our hearts, and hopefully we can get that message across to you guys today. So I think the easiest way to do this is if you guys introduce yourselves. If we can do that, we'll go along the line. Thank you.
Hi, Andy. So can you hear me okay? Excellent. Normally don't need a microphone. So I'm Julie Spinks. I'm the MD of Water Regs UK. So we work with water companies with our role to enforce the water fittings regulations.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I think Andy was being very generous there, calling me a regulation expert. I work for Defra. I head up the Water Efficiency and Demand Management Programme at Defra. In a nutshell, my job is to meet the water demand target, which, if you don't know, is the target that the government has to reduce demand for water by 20% by 2038 per person.
Hi everyone, I'm Samantha Duffy. I'm a Senior Manager for NSF. I'm the Global Water Programme Leader for all of the UK and European schemes. We are a testing laboratory and certification body, having been incorporated 85 years ago, where we manage our process from cradle to grave.
Good afternoon everyone. I'm David J. I'm the Business Unit Manager for KIWA UK down in South Wales. I've been there now for over 20 years, plus an extra 15 years in Samantha's current place. So a bit long in the tooth, but we're learning every day.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here today, and welcome. So I think I'll start with yourself, Julie. What is Regulation 4?
Okay, so you asked what Regulation 4 is. So we're talking about Regulation 4 of the water fittings regulations or bylaws in Scotland. So Regulation 4 says a water fitting, so we mean kind of taps, anything that's connected to the water supply. So it could be a toilet, could be a heating system. Everything has to be a suitable quality and standard. So Regulation 4 says products must be a suitable quality and standard. And essentially, if you install it in the UK connected to the public water supply, it has to have been tested. And there are quite a number of tests, but essentially all of these tests are trying to check that it won't leak. That's very bad for water efficiency. It would be really good if it doesn't leak. And also that it's not going to contaminate. So it's really important we're drinking the water. It's a food product, that we're not going to harm people. So that's what Regulation 4 aims to do.
Thank you. I keep wanting to go and grab the mic. So I think with that in mind, obviously the way to be regulation or prove that you're Regulation 4 compliant is through certification. So if I come back to yourself, Julie, so when we say certification, do you want to just give an explanation of what certification means to, I think, both our manufacturers and to the public generally?
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say is actually certification is optional. There are different routes to demonstrate compliance. So it would be perfectly acceptable for a manufacturer. Yep, the essential thing is you have to get the tests done and by a competent organisation. So it might be that you can test these things yourselves. So, for example, you might be ISO you might be UCAS certified to 17025 for the tests that you do. So the first thing is you don't need certification, but you do have to do the tests. If you choose certification, you're looking for a third party who's going to check the testing or do the testing and say independently that your product meets those tests. So it makes life a bit less complicated, I think, if you go through a certification route.
Yes. Sam, if I can ask you on the same theme. It's packed in. So on the same theme, I mean, from your point of view, how can you help, or what is certification as far as yourself?
Okay, so Andy, So, as Julie said, the certification is something that demonstrates the compliance with that regulation 4. So the certification is really about the process, about how you go about demonstrating. So in the UK, there are 3 main opportunities for that, through RAS, through NSF and through KIWA. And the difference is only about how we manage that process. So, for example, RAS, they would review the data from those approved laboratories, whereas NSF and KIWA, we work from the very beginning where we review the applications, we do the testing, and then we do the certification. But the bottom line is that process and that those various schemes all demonstrate assurance to Regulation 4.
And yourself, David, so on the same theme, the certification process, how can all of you help people to get through that certification process?
Well, first of all, Andy, I think certification should be a mark of trust. It should be an indication that you can trust the product. It should be a mark of quality. And all certification schemes are managed slightly differently. There are certification schemes that just do a one test every 5 years. Other schemes do one test every year. Others include inspection, sampling, annual audits. So there's all kinds of certification. So I know at KIWA we offer multiple options for being able to deliver a certificate. Primary goal is that we should have a 1+ scheme throughout the UK and mirror what's going on in Europe. At KIWA, we are a Dutch company in the UK, but in Europe they've managed these 1+ schemes accurately, successfully. But in the UK, we seem to be stuck in this this level 3 system of one test every 5 years, and I think we should, because you can have a certificate. I say a certificate is a mark of trust. I believe that, been in the game for a long time. But I think we need to be able to start encouraging installers, specifiers, and ultimately the manufacturers to go that extra step and go for the 1+ certification route.
And for those, just explain what the 1+ actually covers as well.
Well, ultimately, the certificate is the output of a process. It's the output. It's what you get at the end of a process. And that process could be quite short, it can be quite long, it can be quite complicated. And depending on the level of what you want, that could include some third-party sampling of the product before it's tested, not just submitted by the manufacturers. Then it has to go through a testing process. Then we go through a certification process. Then you have to maintain that certification process by annual audits of the production facility. So there's a lot to it, but it's not a really well-known process in the water sector in the UK.
And just turning to more from an installer's point of view, if I can just ask, if I come to you, Sam, if you wanted to comment on why it's critical to an installer as well as to the manufacturers.
So, first of all, it's important to remember that it's not a legal requirement to manufacture a compliant product. In the same respect, it's not a legal requirement to sell a compliant product. But for an installer, there is a legal responsibility. So once that product is installed, then that's where the legal aspect comes into play. So from an installer perspective, obviously, what comes with that is reputation. If these products are not compliant, we're going to have leaks, we're going to have problems with water efficiency, we're going to have dissatisfied customers, we are going to have some serious issues. On the other side to that, whilst the legal requirement sits with the installer, it's also important to remember that the consumers, the homeowners, have a responsibility as well. At NSF, we've recently done a survey of those consumers, and we'll be issuing a white paper very shortly. And in that survey, it showed that 46% of homeowners didn't understand the legal requirements. And it also showed that 63% don't even know how to check whether a product is compliant. So installers, when they are installing their own product, the products that they've purchased, they can check that. But quite often, particularly with these online markets now where products look very fancy and are at a very cheap price. They're at a very cheap price for a reason. And so if an installer is asked to install a product, some of these products might not be compliant. So it's really important that installers also educate the consumers and the homeowners. Because one of the key issues as well is whilst the installers could face prosecution through the water bodies, the homeowners could also have serious challenges. For example, if that product fails and they knew that that product wasn't certified, then they could also face prosecution and fines, and insurance companies won't pay out.
Thank you, yeah. And if, Julie, if I can come to you and just ask, so we've talked about the regulation, compliance, being compliant to the water fittings regulations, but we know that that also fits into Part G of the building regulations. So the relationship between them.
I think that's a question for Katie, is it?
Katie, can you?
Yeah, I mean, on the building regulations, so we're looking at them. So at the moment, the government commitment is to look at 110 litres per person per day in the building regulations. And there's a few things that are going to be really important as we do that. So firstly, what fittings are going into the housing? So we know, for example, from a recent report in terms of water efficiency, that about if we don't make houses water efficient, we're looking at over 60,000 houses that potentially won't be built during this parliamentary term. So the government has this house building target of 1.5 million. So from a government perspective, it's super important to get houses water efficient. And the target of 110 is going to be very, very important. But I think something that kind of leads onto that is how we measure it. So from smart metering, which I can come on to a bit later, and also what fittings go into the house and the fact that they're actually working, which is where installers become really important communicators. And all of this policy that we're talking about is really essential. I don't know, Julia, if you have a reply to what I've just said. You might want to come back with something.
No, I mean, I think what the government's doing in terms of water efficiency, which is an enormous challenge actually for all of us. We're going to run out of water by 2050 unless we do something quite significant. Doesn't feel like it on days when it rains. There's a drought already in the northwest. So I think the water fittings regulations are very complementary to the things coming along the train in terms of building regulations, but also I'm excited about the mandatory water efficiency label as well. All of these things are very complementary. Fundamentally, if something leaks, it is not going to be efficient. But the sorts of water fittings that we need to do are over and above the water fittings regulations. That's just about not leaking. For water efficiency, we need products that have really much lower flows, but really give a fantastic sort of customer experience. So I think they're hugely complementary, and it's good to see government working across the different bits of legislation, because there's a lot of work to do to make that happen.
And David, do you want to comment on how that water efficiency and the compliance need to go hand in hand, because the performance of the product is as important, especially when you start reducing the volume of water coming through that fitting?
Well, exactly. The certification is one thing, the regulations are one thing. We're trying to improve what we're doing with the products to meet these flow rates and consumption rates. From a certification point of view, I'm a certification business. We can help the manufacturer work through that process and demonstrate that while the product is in for testing for water regulations and going through the certification. We can always go that one step further for the manufacturer at a very a very favourable rate, and I'm sure Sam would say the same thing. While the product is with us, let's add on some added value onto that certificate so we can demonstrate some other things with it.
Thank you, yeah. And that, I think, leads and segues quite nicely into my next question. For you, Katie, do you want to tell us a bit more about the MWEL work that's going on?
Yeah, so the MWEL, or the Mandatory Water Efficiency Label, is a label that will effectively label a product's water efficiency in a nutshell. So it's similar to the energy label in that it will give an A to F rating of water efficiency. And we've seen this be really successful when there's been a mandatory label in Australia. It's been super successful. It's got really good public awareness of the label of water efficiency, particularly in Australia where there's been quite a few droughts, and we are also experiencing similar issues here. So what we really want to do is bring everyone on board with this, and actually it's good to be able to share with you that we're going to be doing a summer to autumn webinar series. So if you aren't already on all our comms, please go over to the lovely Alison over there after my talk, or come up to me and we'll get you signed up for that. We're really hoping to do a series of sessions on how people can comply with the regulations, what the regulations mean, all of our research on customer engagement with the mandatory water efficiency label, the design, everything like that. We'll be running through that through the summer and autumn period.
Thanks, Katie. And could you just explain a bit again about the relationship of that with Part G, so the water efficiency Part G in the building regulations? So we talk about regulations, we know what we're talking about, but do you want to just enlighten people on what the Part G and the relationship with the MWELs?
Yeah, so the building regulation Part G sets the water efficiency of housing. So I think what Julie alluded to was the fact that if you understand your water efficiency of your product, you can better understand what your house could run at. So the expected standard of water efficiency of a house. That's going to be really key. So that's the first thing. And then kind of leading on to that, it's customer awareness, as I mentioned. So we know, for example, I think CCW came up with some research that said that people think they use about 20 litres per person per day. In actual fact, you use between 137 and 145. So that consumer awareness at the moment isn't really there. So a label would give that information. So that really helps. And then on smart metering, as we've mentioned leakage a fair bit. So that's going to be really key. If we put in any building regulation changes, we need to monitor and evaluate that. So when I talk about the built to standard, that's the standard, like the optimal standard that house could run at with the number of people it's got in it. But actually, once we've done those standards, we need to look at what the house is actually running at, what the customer behaviour, what is happening inside the house, what can we do to support customers to reduce their water usage or be more efficient. And then I think there's another element, Andy, that I'd like to touch on, which is recycled water and the opportunities there. So could you, for things like toilet flushing, for example, could you use recycled water? What needs to happen to make that happen, essentially, on a more widespread basis? So there's some really exciting opportunities, and that would probably get you beyond the 110 litres per person per day that I'm kind of citing here. So there's a lot that can be done in regulation, but it kind of needs every aspect together to actually monitor and see what's actually happening on the ground.
Editors, we've been having some great conversations about how all these things tie in together, and from an association point of view, that's really interesting from us.
Yeah, can I just add to that? So building on the work that's part of the mandatory water efficiency label is that we've seen Ofwat do some consultation now about environmental incentives, and they have introduced this year an environmental incentive for developers, which cuts across and tries to give some similarities about water companies, so that when developers are applying for their connection, that they can get effectively some discounts if they achieve, through efficient water fittings, a particular level of water use as well. So these things are really all linking together, and we're going to see more of that, and we're going to see more water reuse linked to those incentives for new build as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Julie. So we've talked about compliance itself, regulation for what that means to us. We've talked about how it relates and the changes that are coming through with water efficiency. I think the only other thing is to talk about, and I'm really looking at David and Sam on the materials side of things. We know that we've got the Drinking Water Directive in Europe, which is coming through, and for yourselves particularly, you're already involved with your colleagues. But do we feel generally, everybody, it's an open question to how that Drinking Water Directive and the materials and the protection of the water supply is affected, which is what the Regulation 4 is all about. Do you want to just...
The Drinking Water Directive, I don't think from a UK point of view, we hardly spoke about it for months. I think it's a discussion every other conversation at this moment in time. From a UK point of view, we almost felt as though we were immune to it because we were sat outside the EU. But we've got manufacturers asking questions about the Republic of Ireland market. Then we got manufacturers asking about products coming into the UK, what will be accepted. We've had a long-standing standard for materials in contact with drinking water in the UK, BS 6920. There's plenty of labs who are working for that. But Sam and myself both know our colleagues in Europe are planning for this upcoming Drinking Water Directive coming January 27. And I think we have a lot of questions to ask ourselves. And we don't have the answers right now, whether or not that would be an appropriate mark so that we could use that through the Reg 4 certification schemes that we've got. I think we need a wider discussion. I don't think it's been spoken about enough, whether or not we can get that in place. It's interesting, very, very interesting what it means, because our experience of what the Drinking Water Directive will bring, it will bring something at a far greater, higher level of certification than what we're used to in the UK. And what I also understand, it will be enforced at point of sale, not at point of installation, which is another critical factor. It's a huge topic that we really need to be talking about in a much wider forum.
Thanks, David. Sam?
So just to add to that, for anybody who's not aware of what the EU Drinking Water Directive is, as David says, it is a higher level. All products need to go through rigorous testing, looking at microbial growth testing as well. It is all based on hygiene testing, though. It is not mechanical testing at the moment. So in Europe, you would need to have additional mechanical testing relevant to the country. But one of the nice things about that new standard is it is then recognised across all 27 member states. And so from a manufacturer's perspective, from an installer's perspective, etc., then, it's one certification, no nuances anywhere of interpretation. And it is something that we, both KIWA and NSF, can help customers with at the moment. But as David says, for the UK, then Reg 4 is the certification that represents quality and safety at the moment.
Thank you. And if I can just give Julie and Katie the final word on that as we wrap up. Just to say, from the water company point of view in the UK and from Defra's point of view, the water is safe. It's safe already. It's not going to change anything, is it?
We've got a really high level of standards in the UK. We've got some of the best in the whole world, which is fantastic. So when you look at compliance testing for England last year was 99.9 something. I mean, it's really incredibly high. If I go back when you're talking about Europe, is what the law says. So in terms of Regulation 4, it is possible to accept other national standards if they provide an equivalent level of performance and standards. Is it equivalent to the UK? So it can be different, but it has to give an equivalent performance. So in basic terms, that means, and we were talking about this before, if I've got a tap, if I test it in Europe and I was to test the materials in that tap in the UK, that it would pass in both circumstances and vice versa. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get predictability that the materials tested will do the same thing under both sets of tests. And there are differences in how the tests are done and the acceptance criteria. So the really short answer to are the tests under drinking water directive going to be accepted in the UK? Is we don't know yet, because what needs to happen is to have, now the testing standards are starting to settle down, so the delegated acts have only just not long been published, is that we need to have a gap analysis done between the British standard in the UK is BS 6920 versus those tests, and actually to see are they equivalent. And until that work is done, I guess water companies can't answer that question. And I guess it's also an interesting question for the DWI, because they do certification for water-owned assets as well. So they also need to have, I guess, for the water companies and for the DWI, public health is first and foremost in their best. They want consistency and they get the same results. I think the direction of travel is they're both minded. They actually want to accept them. So they're not looking for reasons not to do it. But actually, we don't know at this stage. So we're hoping to do some work with water companies and with the DWI to think about that gap analysis. We've got some time. So we've got the standards are coming in. I think it's the end of 27, beginning of 28 for those people who are having new products to market. And then by 2032, 2033, or the start of 33, everybody will have to have done that within Europe. And so there is time to do that gap analysis and make judgments. So not great if you want an answer now, but the honest answer is we don't actually know yet. But I think for certification schemes and for manufacturers, you probably want the enforcers and the regulators saying what they would accept. That's probably what we need.
And Katie, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add because I'm not in the drinking water team, so I don't want to speak on something that I'm definitely not an expert on, other than to say that, DWI looks after the standards, and then the water companies have obviously published their guidance on the Reg 4, so just wait and see what happens with that. And I echo your points, Andy, that obviously the government wants the health of water to be good, and we have a duty to make sure that water quality in the UK is good.
And we've got some interesting discussions, and the association's working quite closely with Defra as well, and inputting into a lot of the work. So we're working quite closely together to make sure as all these things go as smoothly as possible.
Exactly that.
Thank you, and I'll wrap up there. Thanks very much for your time today, and thanks for coming and talking to us. And thank you everybody for coming along. Thank you very much.